When Conan the Barbarian was released in 1982, it announced the arrival of not only Arnold Schwarzenegger, but also the dirty little secret at the heart of the fantasy craze. The chest-beating, eye-gouging, sword-humping mansplosion of bestial urges that is the Barbarian movie.
You must be the forces of evil I've heard so much about.
You've known a woman and killed a man. Your reign is about to start.
Are you sure?
Very balls of the gods.
Whether Conan was just part of a wider trend or inspired a wave of extraordinary fraud and forgery doesn't matter. We're here for what's best in life, so our enemies will be crushed, most definitely driven before us. And we will be hearing the lamentations of their women, so do bear that in mind if the kids are still up.
Bring the sacrificial virgins.
Ready for an adventure, Cringe?
Shut up or start singing, one or the other.
I have the power!
With a couple of Barbarian movies already in production when Conan hit theatres, Italian exploitationeers must have assumed they'd got the drop on their American cousins, but not this time. While Rome waited for Conan's release, hoping to ride his tunic tails at the box office, in Hollywood the likes of Albert Pune decided to break ranks and go early.
The evil warriors are no longer united. Let's begin. All right, let's do it.
Released 2 weeks prior to Conan, The Sword and the Sorcerer is the first clear-cut example of an 80s barbarian movie, and like most that followed, involves an orphaned chosen one, an usurped throne, and a woman in peril.
Damn his heart, he goes out for a joint of beef and ends up rescuing a king's wench.
It was Pune's debut, but seems more assured and better executed than his later work, benefiting from a great cast led by professional man's man Lee Horsley, who, outside detective series Matt Houston, guess what my new favourite show is, worked only sporadically during his prime, but has since become a regular bit player for Quentin Tarantino.
Why don't you come in then out of the snowy snow and get yourself some coffee? You had a birthday yesterday, got some cake. Pretty good.
Oliver Reed was supposed to play the villain but got the sack after turning up drunk and starting a fight about sandwiches. But it's all good because he was replaced by Richard Lynch, and we also get Simon McCorkindale as a pious prince, a young Reb Brown as a trainee barbarian, and Richard Moll as Richard Moll in a demon mask.
Cromwell's bride and Cromwell's flesh shall be mine!
The first post-Conan Barbarian movie also came from Hollywood, having started shooting before his release, and it's one of the very best.
In a time of mysticism, sacrifice, and plunder, there came the only light. The Beastmaster. The epic adventure of a new kind of hero.
Beastmaster grew out of author Andre Norton's sci-fi novel about a Native American emigre to the planet Azor who's able to talk with a menagerie of genetically engineered animals. The film's co-writers, Don Coscarelli and Paul Pepperman, were only interested in the bare bones of the character though, and jumped on the sword and sorcery gravy train by developing him into a barbarian.
You owe me your life, but I'll accept this as payment.
Lead Mark Singer's terrific as the chosen orphan who can grunt and squeak and squawk with the animals, an ability that was imbued during his birth when he was teleported from his mother's womb into a bull's intestines as part of a ritualistic sacrifice orchestrated by Rip Torn.
It must be cut from its mother, branded with the sign of R, and sacrificed.
Like The Sword and the Sorcerer, Roger Corman's first contribution to the barbarian milieu was shot prior to Conan's release, but shelved until after it, the producer wanting to let the Sumerian prime mainstream audiences for what to expect.
The gods will avenge this!
Even the gods will do as I command.
Directed by pioneering exploitationeer Jack Hill, Sorceress is a comparatively well-budgeted VFX extravaganza loaded with sword and sorcery cliches, from the Wicked Wizard to the Imperiled Kingdom and the Chosen Orphan, or in this case twin orphans, which isn't unusual in itself, but here comes with a twist.
They are girl children.
Girl children are the sport you gods have with us mortals.
The screenplay was written by Jim Wynorski and makes as much sense as a horny goat. For their own safety, Mara and Mira, who are played by Lee and Lynette Harris, are to be brought up as boys, but instead of being in on the scheme, they're simply never told what boys are.
What's that? which he carries there, hanging between his legs? I don't know. Some kind of horn? A weapon, then? But how would he use such a weapon? I don't know, and I'm not going to wait to find out.
It's a bizarre plot point that creates all kinds of problems with the movie's internal logic. So to distract the audience during scenes that make no sense, Hill simply has the girls take their tops off.
You're not boys.
Not boys? Are you sure? What's the difference, really?
You don't know?
Like that.
Like this? Well, yes. I guess we never thought much about it.
Hill hated everything about the production, later branding distributor Hemdale crooks and saying Corman forced him to use the score from Battle Beyond the Stars and random staff members to redub the Mexican actors. He was also disappointed with the VFX, which, well, yeah. Ultimately, it sounds like he wanted to take everything more seriously, but thank Crom, Corman didn't.
It's Mara.
Mara? Is she being tortured?
No.
No. She's not being tortured.
As Mara and Mira were making their creepily naive debut in the US, more traditional orphan chosen ones were doing likewise over in Italy, where director Franco Prosperi, co-creator of the Mondo craze,
Stuff the goose until it explodes!
did the obvious thing and pitted them against each other.
You will confront each other in battle. And he who triumphs will have the right to carry the name of Zukan the Invincible.
But you know the destiny of humanity.
If I thought there was anything worth seeing, I'd be upset about the zoom-in framing, but Gunnan's a washout as both movie and character. Even his adoptive mother agrees.
We've all become a bunch of crybabies and weaklings. All of it that overgrown monkey's fault.
Just a couple of months later, Gunnan producer Pino Baricci and star Pietro Teresi delivered a sequel of sorts in The Sword of the Barbarians, which has Gunnan searching for a mythical, well, you might expect sword.
With this weapon you will be invincible. Its powers are infinite, like the stars in the sky. If your faith is strong enough, you will defeat evil with it.
The triple arrow crossbow is so unwieldy and impractical it can only be used once per action scene, and there are only 2 action scenes. As improbable as it might sound, Gunnan didn't really capture the imagination of audiences back in 1982, but there was one Italian barbarian who did, and he's even lamer.
Ator, a different kind of legend.
The work of sometime movie magpie and frequent hack pornographer Joe D'Amato, Ator the Fighting Eagle is the first of 4 movies about the mighty warrior who's prophesied to bring freedom to his people, and it opens strong with a lengthy voiceover that drifts in and out of the kind of hyperbolic nonsense that can't fail but get your hopes up.
And lo, the kingdom of the spider shall last 1,000 years, for the wrath of the Spider King is mighty. Coran cast his seed upon the wind.
What follows is disappointing, because Ator, or Ator as he's usually called, isn't fit to shine Conan's sword. Played by Miles O'Keefe, who's so flat D'Amato wanted to wire him up to mains power, Ator's an oversensitive mother's boy who's only interested in getting into his sister's furs.
You remember how our ancestors used to allow marriage between brother and sister?
Ator, you don't know how really happy you make me.
You'd allow me to marry my sister?
Okay, so they're not technically blood siblings, but they don't know that, and they were raised from birth as brother and sister. So I'm calling this weird, even if Mum and Dad are fine with it.
Well, then you'll be my parents for the second time.
Did you hear that, Nadia? I think we have to give the good news to the whole village.
Yes.
As 1982 gave way to 1983, Italy's Barbarian craze showed no signs of cooling down, with Throne of Fire delivering on its title and offering a mythology so baffling I don't believe anyone understood it.
I want to reveal the last prophecy. Remember this. You have to sit on the throne. On the day of the night of the day, no later than sundown.
The day of the what of the when?
The day of the night of the day.
Like Gunnan, it was directed by Franco Prosperi and starred the king and queen of Italian barbarian movies, Pietro Teresi and Sabrina Ciani, the latter of whom popped up in almost all of them. Teresi's in nearly as many, despite being so boring even his co-stars can't listen to him.
Evil may sit on the throne of fire,
Only on the day...
By sundown on the day of the night in the day.
It was written in the stars and in the dust of the dead that from the seed of Gant the Annihilator would come the greatest of all chieftains, Thor the Conqueror.
From the seed of Gant the Annihilator, destined to bring peace to all lands, but born in a bush for budgetary reasons, Tonini Ricci's Thor the Conqueror leans hard on the myth-making, establishing early on that everything hangs on the future of this child. It's alright, he's Thor. I'm not going too far down the road of pagan mythology. Theocratic dignitaries like Thor, Goliath and Hercules usually belong to the world of the Italian Peplum movie, but Thor the Conqueror is different because it works just like a Barbarian movie and Thor himself just like a barbarian.
No, Thor. She's not something to eat. The female is stupid. Have your way with her. Take her. She's yours. She must fulfill you and bear the fruit that is called children.
In order to bring peace to all lands, Thor must fight a dozen thugs in what looks like Gunnan's field, but naturally he prevails, and after selecting a new wife, lives happily ever after with his lucky bride.
It is mine, female. In a world of a man you will live. Thor, you remember that. All this land belongs to its conqueror, to Thor, your king. And you will bear the fruit called children.
Lucio Fulci's Conquest was the first Italian barbarian movie to show signs of evolution, with a more artistic and expressionist approach that wanted a more respectable following, and a smashing score from Goblin's Claudio Simonetti. But it also delivers on the basics and exploits the genre's more universal tropes.
Is she your woman?
She is every time I pass by. You can have her too if you like.
Oh, it's all right.
Well, take your sister then.
And there are super intelligent dolphins. I should mention them. But in barbarian terms, I'm interested in the mythical weapon. It's a bold move to abandon the sword, but a laser bow that can shoot through mountains is a fine change of pace. When it comes to Italian genre cinema, Lucio Fulci was the biggest name to tackle the barbarian movie, and Conquest seems to be the most popular of them. But like a lot of Italian movies, it is a bit serious, and there are those who might say this is Yor's world, and that he's the man. If there was a borrowing Blockbusters Hall of Fame, Antonio Margheriti would be in it, or more likely he'd rip it off. The Italian schlockmeister could even copy himself. Yor steals much from Planet of the Apes and Star Wars, but more than anything it's a barbarian movie, and one of the best worst too, thanks to the galloping madness of the genre-bending twists and a star turn from Reb Brown.
Eagle to M1. Mission completed.
Talking box!
Reb plays a chosen orphan who wanders a landscape similar to that of Stone Age Earth, trying to find his purpose, which turns out to be toppling the crazed leader of an android army who wants to use Yor to create a master race of Aryan super cyborgs.
You see, I will operate on your mind until every thought that is not right has been eliminated, and you will have a new mind and memory which will transmit itself to your genes. When you have inseminated this woman, you will die.
It's all inspired by an Argentinian comic book created by Eugenio Juan Zapatero and Juan Zanotto that pictures the apparently prehistoric Yor against villains with a sci-fi flavour, allowing Margheriti a conceptual free hand. So not only can Yor kill dinosaurs with an axe, he can also fly spaceships somehow.
Yor returns to the primitive tribes on the mainland. He is determined to use his superior knowledge to prevent them making the same mistakes as their forefathers. Will he succeed?
And just like that, Italy was done. After meeting Conan head-on with an extraordinary burst of movies, Italy effectively wiped their hands of the Barbarian after little more than a year of oily mayhem. There'd be sequels to Ator, which I'm afraid we'll get to, and some new Peplum movies influenced by Conan, but the baton was being passed forward and would soon end up in the hands of Roger Corman, who'd revolutionised the genre with double the nudity and infinitely more recycled footage. But while the Barbarian movie was generally an Italo-American affair, there were other countries that took a stab at it in the early years, including Spain, where Lauren Landon's Hundra became the first substantial female barbarian.
You are my choice for mating.
Filmmaker Matt Simba is an often overlooked master of 70s exploitation, responsible for The Witch Who Came from the Sea and the excellent Candy Tangerine Man, while his various other adventures included being married to Jane Mansfield, directing a string of sexploitation movies, and co-creating The Glorious Ladies of Wrestling, all of which make him the obvious choice to direct a feminist barbarian movie.
I will not bow to your bull or your men.
Yes, both. Tonight. Else your precious child will fill the bellies of the vultures the next moment you refuse.
Jesus. Hundra introduces us to a race of barbarian women whose only contact with men comes when seed is required for procreation, something our eponymous heroine isn't remotely interested in.
No man will ever penetrate my body with sword or himself.
But when her tribe's wiped out, Hundra finds herself facing the unwelcome task of having to find a mate, if only for a night. And incredibly, it's at this point the movie steadfastly refuses to become stupid, instead continuing its exploration of gender politics.
A man cannot be forced to make love. I would have to be aroused in order to... And that doesn't help at all.
Usually, the chance to talk about a movie from Turkey is a chance for celebration, but while there is a Turkish Conan, it's kind of disappointing. Director Remzi Yonturk worked with Cüneyt Arkan more than 20 times, but unfortunately this wasn't one of them.
Sus.
Ralph Bakshi's Fire and Ice seems to come from another world, so I'm calling it spiritually international, despite it hailing from Hollywood. Painstakingly animated from specially filmed live-action footage using the director's preferred rotoscope method, it's a stunningly beautiful abstract flight of fantasy designed by Conan paperback artist Frank Frazetta.
This unique and elaborate process you have been watching has resulted in one of the most exciting animated feature films ever made.
Fire and Ice. From the visual imagination of Ralph Bakshi and the dazzling artistry of Frank Frazetta.
For the Conan cash-in that's furthest from Howard's writing, Conan the Barbarian Swordsman from Hong Kong's IFD Films and Arts, the company behind the cut-and-paste ninja craze.
The fate of the whole ninja empire is in your hands.
Like their later Full Metal Ninja, Conan with a K began life as Korean action of the warrior, but was recut, redubbed and retitled to exploit a then-current trend, in this case one it has little to do with, especially in the last 5 minutes, which blow any barbarian credibility out of the water.
Please, mister, don't kill my daddy. I love you, please, I beg you. If you must punish him, then you can punish me too. I love my daddy.
With both Turkey and Hong Kong coming up short, there's a lot of pressure on Indonesia's The Devil's Sword, or Golok Satan, but there's seldom cause to worry where Indonesia's concerned.
Find you, Jaga. You dirty dog.
You polluted bitch hound! You shall be the next to die!
There are crazier Indonesian movies than The Devil's Sword, but nevertheless, at least 3 entirely unfathomable things happen before the end of the opening credits. And then the bad guy shows up. The fight that just happens moments later is everything you'd expect, only longer, and it's the last time anything makes sense. Essentially, there are many roving warriors, and they're all after Satan's Golok, which serves to lead us into all manner of byways, battles, and betrayals.
Majesty! How come? You bitch!
The crocodiles are a definite highlight, and so are Eni Christina as a supremely capable warrior princess, and Barry Prima as the heroic Mandala. At this point, Prima was one of the biggest stars in Indonesia, having appeared in a string of blockbusters, including 1981's seminal Jaka Sembang, which, like The Devil's Sword, was based on a domestic sword and sorcery comic. Adaptations like this were popular in Indonesia, but most leaned too much into folk hero mythology, religious legends, or historical events. The Devil's Sword, though, is just about barbarian-y enough to warrant a mention and bless us with its madness.
Release me from here! Release me, I tell you! I'll get revenge on you for this! You wait! Ah!
It's time for some expositional reggae as we take a look at Conan the Barbarian itself to see exactly where it came from and what everyone's been stealing from it. Conan was created in 1932 by Robert E. Howard, presumably in between shootouts with the Untouchables, and by the time of the author's death had appeared in around 24 short stories in Weird Tales magazine. A Sumerian descendant of Atlanteans, Conan was an anti-hero who specialised in wizard hold-ups and damsel rescues, which sounds reasonably familiar. But the character's original iteration was more cultured, honourable and intellectual than his movie counterpart.
You're a f***ing choir boy compared to me! A choir boy!
For inspiration, Howard drew on the works of writer Thomas Bulfinch, historian Edward Gibbon, and philosopher Mestrius Plutarch. But his biggest influence was arguably H.P. Lovecraft, who contributed much to Conan's environment, an otherworldly mythopia christened the Hyborian Age and stuffed with surreal challenges, supernatural creatures, and freaky cults. The stories were popular at the time, but it wasn't until the 60s when they were collected into book form that interest in Conan spiked. And a significant focus of that interest was the cover art depicting absurdly endowed mythic characters, usually in scenes bearing no relation to the stories they illustrate. It's these paintings that created the image of the barbarian in the public imagination, especially those done by the incredible Frank Frazetta.
His covers were so potent that they alone could sell the books regardless of what was on the inside.
We shouldn't underestimate the importance of Frazetta's contribution to Conan's story. Everyone who made a Barbarian movie knew exactly what a barbarian looked like thanks to Frazetta and his unparalleled handle on the genre's visual dynamics.
If it works upside down, it definitely works right side up.
In the early 70s, Conan began appearing in comics, and it's around this time that Hollywood started paying attention to barbarians. Movies like this don't count. But a rights dispute thwarted early efforts to put him in a movie, and it wasn't until producer Ed Pressman untangled everything in 1977 that a viable project took root. With an Oliver Stone script, a deal at Paramount, and a future star of The Terminator keen to play the lead.
What about Conan?
You'd make a magnificent Conan.
Well, I must admit, you're not the first person to tell me that.
The search for a director proved more challenging, with John Frankenheimer, Ridley Scott and Sam Peckinpah all declining the offer. Before the planets aligned, and John Milius, the man who was born for it, finally accepted the job.
He doesn't write for pussies and he doesn't write for women. He writes for men, because he's a man.
With Milius on board, Pressman sold out to producer Dino De Laurentiis, who moved the project to Universal, keeping Arnold, hiring Ron Cobb to design the production, including Conan's sword, and inevitably losing Stone, whose script was described as a drug-induced fever dream.
Cocaine was a disaster.
And who was never going to see eye to eye with Milius.
John had a love of war, which I didn't, so we were coming at it from completely different points of view, and I guess he saw me as a lefty, and I saw him as a crazed right-wing nutcase.
At least it's an ethos.
Milius rewrote the movie almost from scratch, keeping bits like the Crucifixion and Tower of Serpents, which were contributed by Marvel's Roy Thomas, and adding ideas from Viking history and Japanese cinema, particularly Seven Samurai and Kwaidan. The final script features fairly little of Howard's mythology or Stone's atmosphere, with Milius as Conan not just fairer of hair, but also dumber of brains and manlier of nature.
Those are the kind of characters he likes. That's his favorite thing, is the kind of extreme man that has no fear.
After a 5-month Spanish shoot and some mild wrangling over the final edit and whether or not Max von Sydow had actually died at one point, Conan was released on May 14th, 1982, to frankly only kind of reasonable domestic box office and what they call mixed notices.
I often think of the review in Time magazine, which was very short, which called it Star Wars by a Psychopath.
With Milius's movie itself part of a wider sword and sorcery craze, we need rules to identify Conan's barbarian brethren. Tone is crucial. There should be a determined mix of gore, nudity and violence. And these should be woven into one of two sanctioned plots. A barbarian may seek vengeance against an evil wizard, or help an usurped monarch regain their throne by seeking vengeance against an evil wizard. But that's it. At least that was it up until the genre's dissolution in 1987, at which point warping to modern-day LA became a third option.
Hey, sword boy. Looks like you're gonna be spending a little time in jail. How do you like that?
Return my weapon and fight me fairly, thy shit-eating lout!
And then there's the 3 M's, muscles, magic and mythology. Ideally, our barbarian will be an orphan chosen one in a supernatural world, and of course it helps if he's ripped.
Could be a good idea.
Beyond that, any 80s barbarian movie will feature 7 pretty much universal scenes, some of which are common to adjacent genres that appear similar.
What do I look like, Conan the Barbarian?
For example, caveman films such as Iron Master, Quest for Fire, and Master of the World don't count. Not so much because they supposedly take place in an actual period of human history, the one in which Neanderthals roamed the Iron Age, but because they don't work like barbarian movies. The poster for Iron Master looks the part, but it's a movie about the socio-political impact of the discovery of smelting.
Mogul is wise. Mogul knows what he says. Illa doesn't have to be afraid. Rag has gone away.
Rag has gone away, but Vood may come, and Vood won't go away.
And obviously the sword and sorcery realm's full of movies that look familiar but just don't tick the same way. A PG rating and the presence of George Kennedy isn't the end of the world, but a family-friendly hero's journey is beyond the pale for the barbarian.
Use your power!
But I can't!
This is a magic place!
Especially when it requires them to be rubbish barbarians. Arthurian fantasy is also its own thing, although I don't really know what that thing is if it includes Lords of Magic.
The smell of thy murder and thy corruption sickens me.
Release the princess or prepare for wizardly combat.
Ha! The mouse challenges the wolf!
And then there's historical fiction. Vikings, gladiators, marauders, and the interrelated peplum genre, which was a big deal in Italy in the 60s and enjoyed a minor resurgence in the 80s, but again, they don't work the same way. Perhaps because characters like Thor and Hercules can be traced back to Spartacus and Ben-Hur rather than Conan. Remember when Charlton Heston threw that bear into space? If the first 2 years of the Barbarian craze were all about Italy, 1984 and 85 belonged to Roger Corman, thanks to a string of movies that bring new meaning to the phrase, "Ooh, really?"
The most legendary hero of them all, the man they called Deathstalker.
Deathstalker was the first of several Barbarian movies to produce a made in Argentina, where hyperinflation had rendered the exchange rate favourable and the actresses amenable. Its many scenes of sexual assault have made it one of the most notorious barbarian movies of the era, and truth be told, there isn't much else to talk about. Even our hero can't help himself. But beyond that, it's not a terrible movie, especially by barbarian standards. It feels more like Conan than most, with a similar ethereal quality, and lead Rick Hill's actually pretty good in a way. The former football star's no actor, but somehow he's perfectly cast, and the camera loves him.
A brave man could get inside one car's castle and kill him.
You need a fool.
No, a hero.
Heroes and fools are the same thing.
Deathstalker's commitment to cruelty and nudity would put it at the upper end of the Italian spectrum. And The Warrior and the Sorceress takes it even further, with Maria Sokas as an entirely topless character who's either caged or chained in every scene, and David Carradine as an entirely shit-faced one, who's either drunk or stoned in every scene.
Prove it.
It's hard because they cut most of his dialogue, but some of the shots they managed to snatch of him as the Dark One are kind of a giveaway. Apparently director John C. Broderick appointed a crew member to try and keep Carradine's boozing under control until the end of the day, but it didn't work.
It would take 20 men to do a thing like this.
Corman was more interested in female barbarians than the Italians ever were, and in 1985 promoted Deathstalker's Lana Clarkson to a lead role, and the throne.
Barbarian Queen.
It isn't clear if she's meant to be playing the same character as some believe. Her name's different, but then it's different again in the sequel, and it's quite possible nobody remembered or cared what she was called. Which is a shame because she brings an unusual vulnerability to the role, which makes her interesting, if not entirely barbarian-like.
I'll be no man's slave and no man's whore. And if I can't kill them all by the gods, they'll know I've tried.
Shot soon after, but left unreleased for several years, the sequel's more of a reboot in which Athalia, as she's now called, is a Robin Hood-type folk hero who leads a rebellion against a cruel wizard king. And it's a better character with more agency and some great lines.
Everyone has something that can destroy them. One night with me would be the end of you.
There are other standouts too, among the villains anyway, including a gay vice president of torture.
What an awesomely disgusting sight.
And a psychotic 12-year-old girl.
Are you going to hurt her very much?
She's the daughter of the evil wizard king, and he's marrying her off to the general of his army, which is apparently all perfectly reasonable.
I'm not sure she likes me.
I'm not sure she likes anyone.
I've always liked you.
Stormquest is another female-focused fantasy from Corman's Argentinian period, and it finally does something to address this genre's appalling oppression of men.
The men of Vishtan only have one alternative: to be a stud or a drone. We choose neither. We want freedom.
It's not that barbarian-y though, and not nearly as good as Amazon's, which tries harder and feels like it has some meat on its bones, perhaps because it's adapted from a Charles R. Saunders short story about an attempt to topple a usurping wizard Kalungo, who summoned the power not only of evil sorcerer Al Gore, but the masters of the universe.
I have the power!
Like all Corman's Argentinian productions, the effects budget appears to have been spent on large wooden gates, which always look like the most expensive thing in these movies. So when Amazon General Diala finally faces off against counterfeit King Kalungo, it's without the benefit of any optical effects. And when a lion transforms into Evil Lyn, it looks like this. Corman would keep recycling scenes and even whole characters from these movies for years to come, especially in Wizards of the Lost Kingdom 2.
You wouldn't be the Dark One, would you?
I'm just a simple bartender, sir.
In Wizards of the Lost Kingdom 2, there are no returning characters from Wizards of the Lost Kingdom, but there are returning characters from the Warrior and the Sorceress and Barbarian Queen, because about half the movie is made up of recycled footage of David Carradine as the Dark One in the former, and Lana Clarkson as Queen Amathea in the latter. This judicious recycling meant Corman only had to pay the two actors for a few days extra filming in the same costumes to get a whole new movie out of them.
These are hard times for heroes, kid.
Technically, Corman inadvertently created a Barbarian verse. That's not a reason to track it down, but Carradine's performance might be, due to the fresh determination he brought to his on-set drinking.
Ragged warrior, prepare to die.
Hey, I've been prepared for years. What about you?
Silence, you fool. These are your last few breaths before you meet the Protector.
Oh, the Protector, huh? Well, who's protecting you?
Throw him in with my friend.
Is she cute?
Corman wasn't the only one to spot the commercial potential of half-naked 6-foot warrior maidens, with Conan producer Dino De Laurentiis also getting in on the action.
Red Sonja. Only one man on Earth is man enough to win her.
Red Sonja was inspired by a character from one of Robert E. Howard's non-Conan stories, but created by writer Roy Thomas and artist Barry Smith for their Marvel comic series. Sadly, she's less effective than any of Corman's harem of barbarians, and constantly needs saving by Arnold's generic warrior, who for rights reasons absolutely isn't Conan.
My name is Kalidor.
Arnold shouldn't really be in it at all, but De Laurentiis guilted him into a cameo and then took advantage by expanding the character until he could get away with giving him top billing. It's Bridget Nielsen's show, though, which isn't ideal.
I'm going to feed your eyes to the bird, red hair.
I don't need eyes to find you. I can smell you at 100 paces.
With Italy losing interest in the Barbarian movie in 1983 and Corman cancelling plans for more when Amazon's went straight to video in 1986, the genre must have looked all but dead as 1987 rolled around. And it probably would have been, but for a late charge from Canon Films, who picked up the baton from Roger Corman, hopefully gave it a wipe down, and then ran a few more familiar-looking laps with it.
That's it. Take a good look, you lump of hogpiss. I'm looking! Yeah? Then suppose you tell me what you're doing with my face!
David and Peter Paul were high school wrestlers and bodybuilders who moved to California in the early 80s, hoping to develop shared movie careers. Promoted by the world-famous Gold's Gym, they appeared on chat shows, in commercials and magazines, and even scored roles on Knight Rider, playing the heavies in Season 3 opener Night of the Drones.
Yeah, here you have some maps.
Ah, yes. Are you from the university?
Yeah, associate professors.
Which naturally was a double episode. It all led to a 2-picture deal with Canon, but this was the only movie they ended up making there. Shot in Italy by Cannibal Holocaust director Ruggero Deodato, it doesn't bring anything particularly interesting to the table beyond great production design and New York accents.
There's no ruby here. Where's the ruby? Where's the ruby? What do you mean you don't have the ruby? Canary said the ruby was gonna be here. I thought you had the ruby. There's no ruby here. I don't have the ruby. I should kill you now. The ruby. Don't take your eyes off the ruby.
As Cannon was priming the pools for stardom, Menachem Golan was contacted by producer Harry Alan Towers, who was struggling to get his own Barbarian movie off the ground and was interested in a collaboration. The British exploitationeer had acquired the rights to author John Lang's Tarnsmen of Gore, the first in a series of Barbarian novels that draws heavily on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barzoom universe, and that Towers had been unable to finance due to its misogyny. The movie tells the story of history teacher Tal Cabot, who somehow finds himself on the Bronze Age Earth-like planet Gore, where he leads a rebellion against Oliver Reed, who's looking for an action figure. You might remember that back in 1981, Reed was deemed too drunk to play a villain in a canon Barbarian movie, so how had things changed in 1987? Apparently he was hammered throughout filming, and his improvisation and intermittent whispering meant he was a nightmare for the crew. It is hard to hear him at times, and it looks like his dialogue scenes were stitched together from different takes.
High priests, kings of Sar, why did you come so far to find me?
I've come for the homestone of Korova.
Gore was shot back-to-back with sequel Outlaw of Gore, which gives Cabot a couple of sidekicks and makes him more of a traditional hero, rather than the first movie's geek out of water.
I'm not so sure I want to end up a slave.
Listen, as long as I will have some blood left in my veins, I will always fight slavery and oppression. Remember this.
He's even made king for some reason, but that only triggers a series of events that bring Jack Palance into the picture as an evil wizard. He had a cameo in the first movie, but he steps up to main villain here and proves even more unpredictable and entertaining than Oliver Reed.
You are behaving like a bitch in the heat, and not like a queen.
Get out of here, you disgusting worm!
A pleasure, Your Royal Highness.
Despite box office returns for Cannon's mid-80s Barbarian movies being woeful, they still bet big on their last attempt at the genre.
From a distant galaxy, they have come to Earth. Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, Frank Langella as Skeletor. Only they have the powers to be Masters of the Universe.
Famously, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe began life as a toy line when in 1982, then-President Ronald Reagan relaxed laws preventing toy manufacturers from marketing their tat through commercials masquerading as kids' TV shows. This was particularly fortunate for Mattel, who'd lost significant market share to Kenner after turning down the opportunity to license Star Wars only for their rivals to snap it up and make a killing. Reasoning that sword and sorcery would be the next big thing, Mattel had reacted by buying the rights to Conan. And with hindsight, the problem there seems pretty obvious.
Mattel, to their horror, found that Conan was going to be an R-rated film with nudity and violence and stuff. And they thought, well, you can't do a toy line based on that.
Well, you can.
Starship Troopers, Alien, Spawn, RoboCop, Predator, Alien, Toxie.
But that doesn't mean you should. Mattel cancelled the deal, but not before spending a fortune on development, so the decision was made to rebrand Conan as the more child-friendly He-Man and develop an array of corresponding villains and heroes.
Meet Fisto with his super smash power!
The cartoon, which was produced purely as a means of marketing the toys, began airing in 1983, with a feature-length movie, The Secret of the Sword, following in 1985 and designed to introduce She-Ra and Princess Adora.
And now,
Now, princess, I must decide what to do with you.
Oh.
She's fainted.
Just like a woman.
But Mattel chose to cancel He-Man after just 2 seasons, deciding instead to focus resources on a new version of their money-spinning hero. Plans for a live-action take had begun in 1984, but Mattel's controlling approach had made it difficult for them to find a production partner in Hollywood. Ultimately, another of their wrong-headed decisions led to them signing a deal with the struggling Canon, who penny-pinched the production at every turn. Director Gary Goddard found Mattel even more unreliable, their reluctance to stump up money in good time leading to filming grinding to a halt more than once. But the real tragedy was the movie all concerned expected to be the new Star Wars ended up a box office disaster.
People of Eternia, the war is over.
Masters of the Universe certainly has problems, not least the poor representation of He-Man's Eternian comrades Teela and Man-at-Arms, not to mention the existence of Orko stand-in Jar Jar Gwildor.
Native clothing. Lots of it. All over the place. If we dress like this, no one will recognize us.
What the hell is that?
See?
Nevertheless, I loved this movie then and I love it now. The sight of Skeletor descending on a suburban neighborhood gives me a kick, and so does Grayskull's incredible throne room, which was the biggest Hollywood set built since the 40s. A young Courtney Cox is perfect as our relatable human, Meg Foster's never been better as Evil Lynn, and Frank Langella's Skeletor is one of the best screen villains of the 80s.
He-Man lives and possesses that key. I must possess all, or I possess nothing. Find them.
That mask's mold, by the way, was recycled on Star Trek for the guys Worf's always fighting on the holodeck. A much lower budget sequel was proposed and even entered pre-production under the auspices of Albert Pune. But alas, interest in He-Man was waning, just as it was for the Barbarian in general.
Good journey!
The driving wave of the Barbarian craze broke in 1987, just 5 years after it had begun to swell. But sequels would continue to roll in behind, washing up old barbarians on new shores. Technically, Ator began repeating himself in 1982 with Blade Master, an appalling rebootquel in which we're meant to accept Miles O'Keefe, who can't convince as a barbarian, as a scientist as well.
When I left your father's castle, he told me that if ever the geometric nucleus could endanger the world's peace, a messenger would come to me.
Ator's third adventure, which is best known as Iron Warrior, followed in 1987, and it's another reimagining, and with Joe D'Amato temporarily departing the franchise, it also has an entirely different vibe, with Ator now a near-mute Avenger wandering a sometimes Kryptonian world of art house inconsequence.
Silly people, why do you persist?
D'Amato returned for Ator's fourth and final outing, which starts from scratch yet again. Confusingly, it's probably best known as Quest for the Mighty Sword, but also goes by The Revenge of Ator, The Hobgoblin, and Troll 3, thanks to its recycling of masks from Troll 2.
It is a great honor for my master to receive Ator, Prince of the Achille, in his castle. Tales of your deeds have even reached our kingdom. Enter, Ator, and be seated at Prince Gunther's table, so that he may repay you.
Green?
That's right. The color of the goblins.
Produced on a budget dwarfed by those enjoyed by its predecessors, Ator 4 is by far the closest the series got to good-bad territory. Crucially, Miles O'Keefe is no more, having been replaced by oafish meatloaf lookalike Eric Allen Kramer, who's an even worse actor but in a more amusing way.
I offer you the richest treasure in all the lands of the West!
This is a very unusual franchise. Ator has 4 origin stories, 3 pronunciations, 2 incestuous relationships, and the best sword ever forged. But when it comes to sequels, we can do much better.
Somebody looking for me?
Stalker! You came back!
By popular demand.
Get up!
Directed by Jim Wynorski and written by Neil Ruttenberg, who I've never heard of either, on paper, Deathstalker 2 Duel of Titans doesn't look particularly interesting, with its recycled footage and cookie-cutter plot about a wandering barbarian coming to the aid of a princess usurped by an evil wizard.
And this is going to get me into the legends.
Right up there with Conan.
But the jocular tone renders it a horse of a completely different colour and works brilliantly, which is partly thanks to a good script and Wynorski's brisk pacing, but also the inspired casting of John Teleski and Monique Gabrielle in the lead roles of Stalker and Rena the Seer.
I'm a princess!
Who's also a princess. Teleski was in Wynorski's breakout hit Chopping Mall, as well as several other of his better movies, and he's always been underappreciated for his Bruce Campbell-esque wisecracking doofus persona.
You gotta get up pretty early in the morning to catch the Prince of Thieves.
It is pretty early in the morning!
Gabrielle's performance is more controversial, which is madness, because it's exactly as ridiculous as it should be. She's a rare example of a woman cast in a Barbarian movie because she's right for the part, not just because she offers a competitive cost-to-nudity ratio, although she presumably did that too. And she shares great chemistry with Teleski, especially in what should clearly be outtakes.
What's the matter?
Nothing, I just think there's a time and a place for everything.
Well, the top half of you may think it's the wrong time, but the bottom half definitely knows it's the right place.
There are all the usual budget-based limitations, but it's a confident, coherent movie, perhaps because the director's so at home taking the piss. I'm not sure if it counts as a full-blooded Barbarian parody, but it's close enough.
The ceremony traditionally is performed at daybreak.
Ceremony? What ceremony?
Our wedding ceremony.
There's also an exploding dwarf, a score that sounds like Sergio Leone mediating a feud between synthwave and prog rock, and one of the best title drops in movie history.
I'll have my revenge, and Deathstalker 2.
Armed with James Horner's score for Battle Beyond the Stars, Deathstalker and the Warriors from Hell takes yet another tonal turn, but this time it proves to be in the wrong direction. John Allen Nelson is the third actor in 3 movies to play our hero, and gives the most unremarkable performance of them all, although compared to the fight scenes he's positively unforgettable. Original star Rick Hill returns for the 4th and thankfully final Deathstalker, which wants to be a retread of the first but is only half a movie. Some of the missing half is made up of recycled footage, which is no great surprise, but the rest simply isn't there. It's as if key scenes and transitions were never shot, and many of those that were look like filmed rehearsals accompanied by a temporary Foley track, and it doesn't help that the score's missing for some inexplicable reason.
Thank you, Stonehead.
If there's anything to be learnt from the Deathstalker franchise, aside from how to do movie posters and how not to do sword fights, it's that Jim Wynorski writes a good Barbarian movie, so let's be grateful he was hired to script the Beastmaster's belated return to the big screen in 1991, and that Wings Hauser was on hand to play the bad guy.
You would cast your sparkling eyes upon this tattered face and shine your aura upon my throne. Oh. Burn her!
The plot follows an attempt by Hauser's Lord Arklon to steal a nuclear bomb from our dimension, which it turns out can be accessed via a portal leading to an LA alleyway. This was a popular story idea at the time, with numerous barbarians finding their way to contemporary California, but Arklon's the only one who makes no attempt to fit in, and I like to think it's because the inevitably drunk Wings Hauser simply decided not to.
My dear boy, from where I come from, the only thing a virgin is good for
is sacrifice.
Meanwhile, the Beastmaster himself hooks up with the most 1991 teenager he can find, and she guides him through a series of fish-out-of-water shenanigans that make great use of Singer's charm and form the core of the movie's appeal.
Rock and roll, baby.
Rock and roll. Does remind me of an earthquake.
Rights holder Silvio Tabet originally planned for Wynorski to direct, but when he decided to take the reins himself, Jim was kicked to the curb and instigated legal wranglings in pursuit of compensation. Ultimately, Republic Pictures picked the movie up, with a prerequisite of the deal being that the case be settled, which left Tabet powerless to prevent Wynorski getting what he wanted.
You shall tell me how to get to your military base. When you're finished, your mind shall be blank, and all that you know shall cease to be.
We must be in the land of lunatics.
The impetus for Beastmaster 3 was less Conan than Hercules and Xena, which were big news on the small screen when this TV movie cum pilot aired on NBC in 1996. The idea is not bad. Give Dar a menagerie of humans to go with his beasts, and wheel in a Wizard of the Week with whom he must match wits.
By all the beasts in the pit! This is only part of the eye!
A TV series was eventually commissioned, but without Singer in the lead, which makes about as much sense as a Conan movie without Arnold.
He is just a man. Wrong.
Beyond these surprisingly durable franchises, Troma was about the only company still interested in Barbarians by the 90s, and the nature of their first stab at the genre seems kind of inevitable.
I guess you could say I've become a nymphoid barbarian in dinosaur hell!
A nymphoid barbarian in dinosaur hell began life as an experiment conducted by filmmaker Brett Piper to see whether he could produce a near-dialogue-free Ray Harryhausen-style dinosaur epic on a budget of almost nothing. Having established he couldn't, he sold the evidence to Troma, which is how it ended up with the Barbarian angle and ridiculous voiceover.
Because sometimes my juices start to flow, and I feel like a nymphoid.
The following year's Wizards of the Demon Sword looks marginally more like a real movie and unites the iconic Steve Barquette with Russ Tamblyn from West Side Story, Lawrence Tierney from Reservoir Dogs, and Lyle Waggoner from The Carol Burnett Show.
What sort of diseased mind would conceive of something such as this?
Fred Olen Reyes, of course.
This is serious.
Although distributed by Troma, this is very much a Ray project, made because he had access to the sets built for Wizards of the Lost Kingdom 2, and the stop-motion footage is recycled from Planet of Dinosaurs. You know you're in trouble when a movie's money shot's lifted from Planet of Dinosaurs.
Oh, no, not this shit again.
Even more randomly, it's a parody, because Waggoner's first take proved so hammy it prompted Tamblyn to ask if they were making a comedy. We are now, was Ray's response.
The Blade of Actar. The key to eternal dark power. But how do you use it? What is the secret?
Speaking of recycling, Time Barbarians plays the by now overused fish-out-of-water card, delivering yet another mythical meathead to contemporary Los Angeles. You might recognise star Darren McBee from his spell playing Malibu on American Gladiators, his performance as Warrior in the Dungeons & Dragons instructional video Dragon Strike, or Motaro in Mortal Kombat Annihilation, none of which estimable cultural institutions gave him much of an opportunity to act.
The wizard has given me an impossible task. Where do I find this man in this land?
And that's why. It's almost an hour before we get to LA, but once there, things pick up dramatically. Suddenly McBee's inability to gel with anything or anyone begins to serve his performance, and writer-director Joseph John Barmettler starts having some fun.
Your swords match your manhood.
He even has the occasional good idea too. Intriguingly, evil wizard Mandrak finds himself powerless in our world, so instead of dominating us, as is usual in these movies, he ends up a drunk scuffing about the fringes of society. I'm not sure it makes up for the lack of originality early on, though.
I mean, he's like a friggin' Conan.
Time Barbarians was the work of Vista Street Entertainment, a small production company kept alive by Witchcraft sequels and a distribution deal with Troma. An illustrious union that also yielded Eyes of the Serpent.
I have not been beaten in battle since I was a boy of 12. But what good is the stroke of the mightiest sword without a rightful purpose to guy, that shimmering blade.
Bafflingly, it's something of a love story which charts the blossoming romance between Barbarian Bolt and unit of female character Fiona, who naturally come across each other in a vaguely threatening riverside meet-cute.
Come on, I'll help you up. You could do with a bath. Come on, it'll do you good.
You're a woman by a river in a Barbarian movie. You aren't going to have much of a say in how things pan out from here.
I'll leave my pants on. No, fine, I'll take them off.
Over time, the influence of a mother movie will ebb, flow, distort and dilute, but seldom has it collapsed so spectacularly as with Conan. There are recent Conan equivalents, Conan for example.
His name is Conan.
Conan. That's it?
How many names do I need?
But they don't feel like his descendants. The 1980s Barbarian movie is so inextricably informed by its era's social and cultural trends that its spirit's almost entirely absent from even R-rated modern equivalents. They can deliver the darkness, but they do it so differently that they're no more like Conan than the PG offerings that go out of their way to distance themselves from him.
I make my own destiny.
It all went wrong in the 90s when the movie Barbarian's balls were cut off. The pressure to gentrify had been there from the start. It's why Beastmaster, Ator, and even Conan the Destroyer were PG. But those movies had an edge that was lost somewhere in the mid-90s.
Feel the power, live the legend of Conan the Adventurer. Conan! Coming soon from Hasbro.
By the time we get to Conan's canon ancestor, Kull, the movie Barbarian had become unrecognizable.
I do not take women against their will.
Who are you?
Robert E. Howard's Kull of Atlantis, here rechristened Kull the Conqueror, wasn't intended to be family-friendly when it began life as a screenplay for Conan 3, but commercial realities became insurmountable. TV's Hercules had proved there was a large youthful audience for large shirtless men. So when Arnold turned the project down, the prevailing winds blew it into Kevin Sorbo's lap, and producer Raffaella De Laurentiis had no problem accepting his demand to replace all nudity and meaningful violence with one-liners and lashings of MTV.
May this dog suffer an eternity of pain.
But not today.
But proper Barbarian movies don't just feature unimaginable cruelty, wanton violence, and shocking misogyny. They're defined by it. They wear it like a uniform, one that today only comes with clown shoes. If the spirit and aesthetic of the 80s movie Barbarian has been kept alive anywhere on screen, it's in adult comedies like the excellent Korgoth of Barbaria.
Ooh, what's your sign, baby?
It's as if the only way to address and channel the genre's outdated and unsavoury aspects today is through humour, which is pretty much how we now process the classics too.
Whatever turns you on.
This is a weird genre. John Milius's Conan the Barbarian is a development of a distortion of Howard's character, the wider barbarian world, and the sword and sorcery craze in general. It's not a faithful representation of any of them, and that seems to have led to a quandary for the exploitation ears looking to hijack a little of its popularity. What do they take? What do they leave? And what do they add? The kitchen sink stir-fry they came up with was a free-for-all incorporating all the cheapest common denominators.
Barbarians, man.
Not a broad or coherent movie movement. It requires us to find humour in what are outrageous cultural anachronisms.
Get her ready for copulation.
Clothes off. She said she was 19.
You'd allow me to marry my sister?
Hold her still and uncover her belly.
And that won't be for everyone, but it has its place. The 80s Barbarian is a roving free spirit in a buttoned-down world. Not a free spirit I want coming near me or my family.
That's logic.
But it's strangely reassuring to know it's out there.